Hello, Warren Township Schools community. This is Dr. Mingle, superintendent, with our first summer school closure update. Here, recording on Thursday, June 25th, 2020, which is important because we know that any day now we are expecting guidance coming from the New Jersey Department of Education about reopening. So I'm recording this before receiving that guidance. Certainly, we will update the information as soon as we have more to share on that front. Some quick updates before we get into the survey results from our parent and community survey with our staff as well. First of all, the district and building return to school committee work is ongoing. We have meetings going on regularly all summer long, and you can always get the most up-to-date status summary on the dashboard at the district website. When you go to www.warrentboe.org, it immediately gives you a COVID-19 return to school option, and you can see the current status of all of that action that's happening. We are also working diligently to be prepared to start in-person special services assessments for students who require them beginning the week of Monday, July 6th. This requires us to be in compliance with all of the summer camp inside guidelines issued by the New Jersey Department of Health, and that work is underway. So we will be ready to launch that process beginning right after the 4th of July weekend. And finally, the Board of Education held a lengthy discussion about some major topics related to return to school back on June 22nd, which option we should go with if we have to have a hybrid because of the limits on the number of people that can be in a room at a time, what that looks like for transportation, specifically on our large buses where we have seats for 54 students, but the current CDC guidelines recommend holding those buses to 27 students. And also options for distance learning and telework, not only for people whose health conditions require it, but for people who might not feel comfortable coming back when we reopen. You can find more information. The video is up on the district's website, and that discussion starts around the 40-minute mark for those that are interested in following along. The rest of our time today will be a detailed dive into the school closure survey data. So I'm going to go through question by question and share both the parent and staff member perspectives. If you would prefer to do that on your own or do your own analysis, the slides will be available in today's community update briefing email so that you can go through that data as well. The first part of the survey was looking back at our time out since March 16th, the flexible instruction days. So we asked the question about teacher communication. Both our staff and our parents felt strongly that email was the most beneficial version. You can see that our teachers and our parents also felt Google Classroom was the second strongest. Teachers feeling a little bit better about the communication than parents. When it comes to district communication out, the community briefing emails by far were the strongest area. The only one where both parents and staff members felt, the majority felt that it was a preferred method of useful communication. Staff also had a higher rating on the weekly video than parents did, as you can see. We asked parents and staff members about the social and emotional well-being of students throughout the FID experience, with a 0 representing that the person had significant concerns about the child's social and emotional well-being, and 100 being everything's good. Parents and staff members were in the same range there, in the high 60s, low 70s, as far as the social emotional well-being of students throughout that time period. We asked about participation, with 0 being that the student did not participate at all, and 100 being that the student was fully participatory at all times. Parents were a little bit higher on their child's participation than teachers here, with an average score of 78 for parents and 73 for staff. Engagement with field trips, pretty much in line between parents and staff at the 72-71 mark as far as engagement. We also asked a question, and this one's a little bit different because the scale is different here than the previous questions, of workload. A 0 was a parent signifying or a staff member signifying that students had way too little work. A 100 was a signification of way too much work, and a 50 being the Goldilocks, just right in the middle. I'm really proud of this response here from our parents being an average score of 50 as far as workload goes, that the average experience was just right. And staff members, pretty much the same thing with a couple ticks above the just right mark of 50. Now, it's important to note here, just like on every other question in the survey, that the range of answers is significant. So there are certainly parents who feel that their child had way too little work or way too much work. But when we look at the district as a whole, and our participation rate in the survey was significant with almost 1,000 responses from parents, whereas we have about 1,500 students enrolled. So pretty confident with the quality of the data receiving from our parents and our staff in this survey. Academic progress, similarly, a 0 being the student fell behind, 100 being that they moved ahead, and a 50 being they were right in the middle, maintaining progress. Parents said we were at 49, staff members at 55. Key takeaways: parents and staff members preferred email and Google Classroom for teacher communication. Parents and staff members preferred the community briefing email and the video for district communication. Parents and staff members perceived student academic and field trip engagement and social emotional wellness comparably, which I think is important and we shouldn't take for granted, that our parents and our staff are generally seeing things the same way. Parents felt that the workload was just right on average, and that the academic progress was right in the middle to scale up and maintain progress. Now we'll move to the return to school part of the survey. You can see here by this answer that the participation, they had 1,072 surveys from parents and 368 from staff members, again, representing a significant participation. Just so you can see the quick breakdown on the parent side, of course, there are more middle school responses than elementary school. That makes sense based on the number of students enrolled there, but you can see participation across the schools and across grade levels. Similarly, with our staff members, you can see participation across the schools. Of course, more staff members at the middle school. There are staff members and parents who might be counted in more than one place because they work in more than one place or because they have children in more than one place. Okay, so maybe the most important question of the whole thing: which options do you prefer to reopen? And both our parents, with an actual majority, and our staff, with a plurality, support as their highest preference returning to face-to-face school with health and safety rules in place. Next highest in both cases is, in the staff's case, is unsure, with nearly a quarter of staff saying they're not really sure at this point. On the parent side, there's the second highest response was a blended approach, some kind of a hybrid between face-to-face and distance learning, which we'll talk more about in a minute. Continuing with distance learning, the lowest response for both parents and staff members. The next related question is whether or not people would send their children or whether staff would return in a setting when schools reopened. As you can see, the plurality of responses from parents is that they would definitely send their child. If you add up definitely and likely, we're up into the 72-73% range, which is pretty high, with about 18% unsure. On the staff side, similarly, very high response for a definitely return and likely return. Adding those together, we're up at about 86%, with about 13% unsure at this time. We also asked parents about transportation and whether or not they would send their children on buses. As you can see, about 66-67% of parents said that they would likely or definitely send their child on the bus. This is one of those areas that will need further investigation because the current guidelines say to have one student per seat on a bus, and there's no way we'd be able to accommodate that with our current ridership. So we'd have to think about options, and the board will continue considering options for transportation. We also asked parents and staff members to rate on a 1 to 4 scale of do not support to highly support various options that have been floated for how to reduce the capacity of our schools. So under the current CDC guidelines, we would be required to maintain 6-foot separation, which we can't do with everybody attending school at all times. So if we have to have some option that reduces the capacity of our buildings, options on the table might include shortened school days, an A-B schedule where half the students come to school one day and the other half come to school the next day, or an A-B schedule where half the students come to school one week and the other half of students come to school the next week. Under all of these options, it's important to realize that when students were not physically in school facilities, they would be attending school through distance learning. So obviously the preference here from our parents and our staff in all cases is to get kids back to school. However, if we can't bring all kids back at once, what's our best option for how to accomplish that? You can see our staff supports the shortened school days, such as a delayed opening or early dismissal, which would allow us to do things such as provide staff time to manage their distance learning students during the day. So it's a shortened school day for the students, but not for the staff members. It might allow us to not serve lunch, which would eliminate one of the highest risk areas of our school operation in the cafeterias. Parents did not support that option at the same degree as staff. Within the hybrid options, both staff and parents had a preference for an alternating day-by-day schedule. There's also another model that's not reflected here that some school districts are considering where it's 2 days on, 2 days off, or a model where it's the same students come to school Monday and Tuesday, all students operate in distance learning on Wednesday, and then the opposite students come to school on Thursday and Friday. So all of these things are options that will be considered once we see state guidance. We also asked parents and staff to rate all of the recommended health and safety protocols in the current CDC guidelines. The top 7 most supported options were the same for staff and parents, all of these above a 3 on a 1 to 4 scale. Everybody supports strictly enforcing protocols for keeping staff and students home, supports providing options for distance learning and distance working where there are high risks, limiting non-essential visitors, volunteers, and activities. And then you could see some changes start to happen there with daily temperature checks, teaching and reinforcing the use of face coverings when physical distancing can't be maintained for staff, limiting bus capacity, and limiting gatherings and events. As we go through the rest of the list, you can see even the lowest rating area has an average score of 2.65, which is more towards the support side than it is to the not support side. For staff, the lowest rated area has a rating of 2.82. The lowest area, so requiring face coverings for all students at all times, has lower support than the other items. We don't yet know what the requirements will be. This is a good indicator of where our staff and parents were feeling as of the beginning of June. We'll see how this morphs over time as we get more guidance and more knowledge. We also asked whether or not it was important or how important it was for the Warren Township schools to follow the same model as the other Watchung Hills districts. Seems to not be that strong of a requirement. Both staff and parents right around the middle ground there on a 0 to 100 scale. Even less important to parents that we follow the guidelines of other school districts outside of the Watchung Hills, but higher for staff. And you can imagine that staff members who have kids going to school in other communities are naturally concerned about how our work requirements would line up with their parenting requirements. This will be a challenge if New Jersey does not issue statewide guidelines on how we approach reopening. Key takeaways here, parents and staff members prefer a return to school facilities in September, and all of our efforts are on making that happen. Parents prefer full-length student school days. Staff members prefer shortened student school days. Neither parents nor staff members showed significant support for the AB hybrid options. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, if we are required to lower capacity in the buildings to maintain distancing, we will need to consider a hybrid option. And there's general support above a 265 for all of the CDC recommended health and safety guidelines. Parents have the lowest support for students wearing face coverings if they are not high risk. So what comes next? The school committees are drilling down into school-specific results from those surveys and specifically the open-ended responses to see what kinds of concerns there might be about an individual student or staff member. The hybrid options will be narrowed for the committee work once we see the state guidelines, and we will continue to seek additional feedback from parents and staff members about those options. We are anticipating a launch on July 6th of a survey that will have updated information about what we know from the state and what options are under more consideration. Thank you for your attention. The slides that support this presentation will be available through today's community briefing in addition to this video. Thanks again for your support as we continue working together to return our students and staff safely to our school facilities for September.